In 2012, a woman in Colorado came home, sat down on the kitchen floor and started crying. Her dog crossed the room and pushed its head into her lap. That part isn't surprising. Here's what is. 3 streets away, a dog that had never met her stood at a window and started whining at the same time. Dogs don't need to know why you're upset. They can smell that you are. And once you understand what they're actually detecting, the whole idea that they're comforting you starts to look very different. So let's start with the part nobody thinks about. You are constantly leaking information. When you get stressed, your adrenal glands release cortisol. Within a few minutes, it shows up in your sweat. Your breathing changes. Your heart rate shifts. The bacteria on your skin start producing slightly different compounds because the chemistry they're sitting in has changed. None of this is voluntary. None of it is something you can suppress by deciding to seem fine. And then there's a dog in the room with roughly 300 million scent receptors. You have about 6 million. The part of its brain devoted to processing smell is proportionally around 40 times larger than yours. So when you tell yourself you're hiding it, understand what you're actually attempting. You are trying to conceal a chemical change from an animal that was built over tens of thousands of years, specifically to detect chemical changes. You are not hiding. You are broadcasting. In 2018, researchers at Queen's University, Belfast ran a study that makes this concrete. They collected sweat samples from people watching videos designed to make them frightened. Then they took those samples into a separate room with different dogs who had never met any of the donors and released the odor. The dogs who smelled fear sweat showed measurably higher heart rates. They sought reassurance from their owners. They were more hesitant around strangers. They had no visual information, no tone of voice, no context at all. They caught the emotion from the air. That's the first mechanism. But smell alone doesn't explain the timing, because animals often react before you've broken down, sometimes before you've admitted to yourself that anything is wrong. For that, there's a second system. Dogs are extraordinarily good at reading human bodies, not faces primarily. Bodies, when you're low, your posture drops. Your movements get slower and less varied. You take longer to respond to things. Your voice loses some of its pitch range and flattens out. You stop doing the small automatic behaviors that fill a normal day, the humming, the fidgeting, the talking to yourself in the kitchen. To a dog, that's not an emotion, that's a pattern break. And a dog has spent every day of its life building a model of your patterns because your patterns are the single most important variable in its world. When you get up, when you eat, when the leash comes out, what your footsteps sound like when you're in a good mood versus a bad one. It isn't watching you because it's curious. It's watching you because you control everything, which is why the detection is so fast. It isn't interpreting sadness. It's noticing that the system it depends on has changed state. There's a study out of the University of London where researchers played recordings of a human baby crying, then meaningless white noise, then a human humming. The dogs oriented hardest toward the crying. Their cortisol rose. They showed submissive, appeasing behavior, lowered heads, flattened ears, approaching slowly. Here's the detail that matters. Cortisol rising is a stress response. The dogs weren't calmly assessing a sad human and choosing to help. They were becoming distressed themselves. And that's where this gets more complicated than the version we tell ourselves. Because there's a difference between emotional contagion and empathy, and almost every warm story about animals comforting people collapses that difference. Emotional contagion is catching a state from someone near you, the way a room full of people gets tense when one person is tense. It requires no understanding of the other individual at all. Empathy means modeling what someone else is experiencing from their perspective, while knowing it isn't yours. Human infants show emotional contagion in the first days of life. Put one newborn in a room crying and the others will start. They are not sympathizing. They're resonating. Most of what we see in animals around distressed humans looks like the first thing. The animal detects the change, catches the state, becomes uncomfortable, and moves toward the source of the disruption because in its experience, proximity to you is how uncomfortable situations get resolved. That is not nothing. But it is not the same as understanding your grief. And it isn't only dogs. In 2016, a study at the University of Sussex showed horses' photographs of human faces, some angry, some neutral. The horses' heart rates rose for the angry faces, and they consistently viewed those images with their left eye, which routes to the right hemisphere, the side associated with processing threat. Horses were never bred for emotional attunement to us the way dogs were. They picked it up anyway, because we're the largest predictor of what happens to them. Cats do it too, And the research on this is genuinely funny. Study at Oregon State found that cats do respond to human emotional cues and do prefer human interaction over food in a surprising number of cases. They simply don't perform the response in a way we recognize as caring. A cat that sits 4 feet away, facing slightly off, saying nothing, may be doing something closer to what your dog is doing than you'd think. It's just not going to make it obvious. Elephants go further than any of them. Wild African elephants have been documented approaching distressed herd members, touching their mouths with their trunks, vocalizing in a specific low rumble, and matching the distressed animal's emotional state within seconds. Crucially, the responders' own stress markers rise. They are not observing distress, they are joining it. So here's the honest picture: they know something is wrong. That part is not in question, and the mechanism is more impressive than the myth. They're pulling it from your chemistry, your posture, your voice, and a model of your behavior they've been refining for years without you ever noticing they were building one. What they probably don't have is the story. They don't know it's about a diagnosis or a person who left or the specific weight of the thing you're carrying. They know the system changed, and they know that historically, moving toward you is what works. And I'd argue that's stranger and better than the version where they understand, because understanding is cheap. Plenty of humans have understood exactly what was wrong with you and stayed on the other side of the room. What an animal does is respond to the raw signal, without the story, without the assessment, without deciding whether your problem is serious enough to deserve attention. It doesn't need the reason. It just registers that something changed and closes the distance. Go back to that kitchen floor. The dog crossing the room didn't know what happened that day. It couldn't have. What it knew was that the shape of its entire world had shifted, and the only response available to it was to get closer. That's not sympathy. It's something older than sympathy, and it doesn't require being understood at all, which might be the reason it works. So here's what I actually want to know. Has an animal ever clocked your mood before you did? Tell me what it did in the comments, because the specific behaviors people describe are half the evidence in this field. Also, there's a single cat hidden somewhere in this video that appears in exactly one frame and has nothing to do with anything. If you spotted it, drop the timestamp below. One random person who gets it right, I'll announce the winner in the next video. And every study I mentioned, the Belfast sweat experiment, the horse faces, the elephant rumbles, all of it is linked in the description. Thanks for watching.